When my husband and I moved to Oregon last spring, we were looking for a reset. We'd both grown tired of city life in Phoenix. The heat, the noise, the constant rush. So when I got offered a remote position with a publishing company, we jumped on the chance to relocate somewhere quieter. We found a cozy two-bedroom house in a cul-de-sac just outside Eugene. The kind of place with overgrown trees, kids on bikes, and neighbors who wave when they see you. It felt like the kind of neighborhood we'd dreamed about. Peaceful, safe, friendly. That's what I kept telling myself. On our first day there, we met Greg. He lived in the pale blue house to our left, a one-story ranch with faded shutters and an obsessively manicured lawn. He showed up while we were unloading boxes from the U-Haul, holding out 2 iced lemonades and a big smile. Greg looked to be in his late 40s, balding but energetic, the kind of guy who talks with his hands and laughs at his own jokes. He told us he'd lived there for over 15 years, and that if we needed anything, he was right next door. He offered to help with yard work, recommended a local diner, and even gave us a list of things to avoid in the area. It was a little much, but I chalked it up to him just being neighborly. At first, his kindness was genuinely helpful. He fixed a dent in our mailbox before we even asked. One morning, after I struggled with my car not starting, he was already under the hood by the time I came back with jumper cables. He refused payment, saying, "Neighbors look out for each other." He even brought over groceries once when he saw a delivery truck skip our order. It became a running joke between my husband Tom and me that Greg was like a suburban guardian angel, always watching, always ready to jump in. We appreciated it, at first, but then it started to feel like he was too ready, like he was always there. Every time we pulled into the driveway, he'd appear from somewhere, watering his plants, just checking the mail, or pretending to adjust something on his porch. Once, I left the back door open for just a minute to carry groceries in, and when I turned around, Greg was standing just inside, holding a bag I'd dropped. He grinned and said, "Didn't want you to forget this," as if it was totally normal. I laughed it off at the time, but something about how quietly he'd slipped in stuck with me. He hadn't knocked. He hadn't called out. He'd just walked right in. A few days later, I was home alone when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole, and of course it was Greg. He had a box of donuts in one hand and a folded flyer in the other. I hesitated before opening the door. Something I hadn't done before. He said he'd picked up extra at the bakery and thought we might like some. I smiled, took the box, and thanked him. But then he stayed in the doorway, holding the flyer like it was urgent. "There's gonna be construction on the main road this weekend," he said. "Just thought you guys should know." I thanked him again, tried to close the door, but he didn't move. "You okay being here alone today?" he asked, glancing past me into the hallway. I lied and said Tom was in the shower even though he wasn't home. Greg finally nodded and walked off, but I felt unsettled. That wasn't a normal question. Tom agreed we needed to set some boundaries. We both felt it. This weird sense that Greg wasn't just trying to be helpful anymore. He was trying to be inside our lives, like a piece of furniture that kept appearing in every room. So we started to pull back. We stopped answering the door unless it was urgent. We didn't wave anymore when we pulled in. I even started closing the blinds during the day. It felt rude but necessary, and for a few days, it worked. Greg kept his distance. No surprise visits, no weird hovering. Until that Tuesday. We got home around 6 p.m. after running errands, and I immediately knew something was off. Our front door was locked, but the air inside felt wrong, like someone had moved through it. I walked into the kitchen and dropped the bag of groceries. Greg was standing by the sink, just standing there holding one of our coffee mugs like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Hey there," he said with a nervous laugh. "I thought I heard something earlier, a bang or crash. Just wanted to make sure everything was okay." I was frozen. Tom stepped in behind me, and his voice dropped an octave, calm but firm. "How did you get in, Greg?" Greg's eyes flicked to the side door. "It was unlocked," he said, still smiling. It wasn't. That night, we didn't sleep. We double-checked every lock. We argued about whether we should call the cops, but what would we even say? Our neighbor is overly friendly? He hadn't stolen anything. He hadn't made threats. But the invasion, the intimacy of it, it was chilling. I couldn't shake the image of him standing in our kitchen, like he belonged there, like he'd done it before. I started obsessively checking windows, doors, even the attic. I found myself locking the bathroom door even when I was alone. Tom installed a security camera in the living room the next day, just to feel like we had some control. That's when we noticed something far worse. While Tom was setting up the app for the living room cam, I decided to vacuum the bedroom. I moved the small dresser near the corner vent, one we'd barely paid attention to since moving in, and noticed something odd. The vent cover wasn't flush against the wall like the others. There was a tiny gap along the edge, just wide enough to slip a finger into. When I pulled it open, something clattered inside. At first I thought it was a screw or a nail, but when I looked closer, my stomach dropped. It was a tiny black lens, rigged with what looked like a DIY cable running into the wall, into the shared wall between our house and Greg's. Tom and I just stared at it. Neither of us said a word for a while. Then we traced the cable behind the drywall using a flashlight and saw that it snaked directly toward the side of the house Greg lived on. That explained why he'd always been so helpful, why he knew when we were home, why he always showed up at the perfect time. He hadn't just been watching. He'd been studying us, listening. Maybe for weeks. Maybe since the very first day. We didn't confront him. We didn't knock on his door. We called the police and showed them the camera, the wiring, everything. They brought in a tech team that confirmed it wasn't part of any commercial security setup. It had been installed manually and fed into a crude monitoring system through the shared wall. The cops asked if we wanted to press charges, and of course we did. But when they went to arrest him that night, Greg was already gone. His house was nearly empty, like he'd packed in a rush. The only thing left was a half-empty coffee mug sitting on his kitchen table, the same style as ours. We moved out less than a week later. Couldn't stay, couldn't sleep. I still jump whenever I hear the floor creak. I check vents like other people check for bed bugs. There are moments when I'm brushing my teeth or changing clothes, and I feel this prickle on the back of my neck, like someone's watching. And I have to remind myself, you're safe now. But the truth is, I don't really believe that, because someone like Greg doesn't just vanish. He prepares, he plans, he moves on. And somewhere out there, I'm sure there's another friendly neighbor handing out lemonades, laughing too hard at his own jokes, and slipping a camera into someone else's wall. I'm not the kind of person who normally posts online, but this has been sitting on my chest for months now, and I feel like I need to get it out. My name's Rachel, I'm 34, and I live in a quiet part of Portland, Oregon. Nothing fancy, just a modest duplex on a residential street where people mind their own business and things stay quiet after 9 p.m. At the time this all happened, I had just switched to remote work and spent most of my days on my laptop, sitting by the front window with a cup of coffee nearby. I lived alone with my cat, Murphy, and I actually enjoyed the quiet. The upstairs unit had been empty for a while since the last tenant moved out midwinter. The landlord, Mr. Hoffman, told me he was renovating it before listing it again. But sometime in early May, that silence changed. It was a Thursday afternoon when I first heard footsteps upstairs. Not just soft walking. These were heavy, deliberate steps like someone pacing. At first I assumed Mr. Hoffman had finally found new tenants and just forgot to mention it. But it was odd. because I never saw a moving truck or anyone coming in and out. The sounds weren't constant either, just these short, intense bursts of movement. A few days later I started hearing voices. Muffled at first, but clearly a man and a woman. I could occasionally make out words, short, sharp exchanges. Nothing friendly. One night I was brushing my teeth when I heard what sounded like a slammed door, followed by a woman crying. It wasn't just sniffling, it was guttural, like the kind of sobs that come from someone who's completely unraveling. I stood there with the toothbrush still in my mouth, heart racing, not knowing what the hell to do. By the following week, the tension had grown thick. Every evening around the same time, usually between 9 and midnight, I'd hear yelling, things hitting the floor, and what sounded like someone kicking the wall. I pressed my ear to the ceiling once, and I swear I heard someone whispering, "Please, stop," so faintly I wasn't sure if it was real, or just my brain trying to make sense of the chaos. I started recording the sounds on my phone just in case. I didn't know what good it would do, but I had this sinking feeling that something terrible was happening up there. I thought about calling the landlord, but I didn't want to overreact. I didn't know these people. Maybe they were just a toxic couple going through hell. Still, there was something in the tone of the woman's voice that made my stomach twist. Everything escalated on a rainy Monday night. I remember it clearly because the thunder had been rumbling for hours, and Murphy was hiding under the couch like he always did during storms. Around 11 p.m. I heard a loud crash, like furniture being overturned, followed by silence, then a single, short scream. That was it. No footsteps, no voices, just dead air. I panicked and called 911. The cops arrived maybe 10 minutes later, and I watched from my downstairs window as they knocked on the upstairs door. A man answered, tall, thin, with a neatly trimmed beard, and this completely calm expression, like nothing had happened. I couldn't hear what he said, but after a couple of minutes the officers just left. No backup, no follow-up, nothing. I stood there, stunned. The next day I found out from one of the officers that the guy told them his girlfriend had left earlier that evening after a fight. He claimed the noise was just him, dropping something heavy. I didn't buy it. Something about the guy's demeanor was off. Too relaxed, too composed. If my girlfriend had just stormed out and the cops showed up at my door, I'd at least look flustered or annoyed. But this guy? He acted like he'd just been interrupted while watching TV. That night the noises didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. I heard the crying again, quieter this time, like someone was trying not to be heard. There was this repetitive banging, like fists hitting the wall in a slow rhythm. Murphy was staring at the ceiling with his ears back, growling, a sound I'd never heard from him before. I sat on my bed in the dark, phone in hand, fingers shaking as I hit record again. I knew something was wrong, but I felt powerless. The cops had already been there. They didn't see a problem. What was I supposed to do? Accuse a stranger of hiding a woman in his apartment? The next morning, I called Mr. Hoffman. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I just said I was concerned about the noise and asked if he had rented out the upstairs unit. There was a pause. Then he said, "Rachel, the upstairs unit's still vacant. It hasn't been rented yet." "Why?" I could feel my skin go cold. I explained in pieces what I'd been hearing, the voices, the fighting, the night I called the police. He went quiet for a while, then said he was coming by that afternoon to check it out. When he arrived, I met him at the front door and handed him my phone with the recordings. He listened, eyes narrowing with each passing second. When he finally looked at me, there was something different in his face, like a switch had flipped. "I didn't give anyone permission to be up there," he said. "I'm calling the police again." This time, things moved fast. Mr. Hoffman insisted on meeting the officers there himself and walked them up to the second floor. I stayed inside, peeking through the blinds, heart racing. It took longer than I expected, maybe 20 minutes. Then the front door burst open, and 2 more squad cars pulled up, lights flashing. The man was escorted out in handcuffs, his head down, eyes hollow. He looked nothing like the calm guy from before. He looked disheveled, like someone who hadn't slept in days. The landlord later told me the guy had broken in through the back window nearly 3 weeks earlier. He had been living there off the grid, bringing food and supplies through a side entrance. And the worst part? He wasn't alone. They found her in the bedroom closet, bound and barely conscious. A woman, around my age, with bruises on her wrists and a deep gash on her forehead. She didn't say much at first, just kept repeating the word sorry over and over again. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, and for a long time that was all I heard. No one told me what had actually happened between them, or how she ended up there. I think the cops kept things quiet on purpose. Maybe it was part of an ongoing investigation. But I couldn't shake the image of that closet door opening, the officer stepping back, and this frail woman stumbling out like she hadn't seen light in weeks. I still hear the sound she made, that shallow gasp like her lungs forgot how to breathe. And I still wonder how long she would have lasted if I hadn't made that second call. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep properly. Every creak in the house made me flinch. I kept thinking about all the nights I heard her up there, pleading, crying, being hurt, and how close she was, just 1 floor above me. I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. What if I hadn't called that night? What if I had brushed it off as just another couple fighting? The guilt hit me in waves. Even though I did call, it didn't feel like enough. I missed something. I lived under that horror show for days and didn't do more. I tried to justify it to myself, saying I couldn't have known, but that didn't make the feeling go away. Mr. Hoffman ended up replacing the door, reinforcing the locks, and installing a security camera out back. He also gave me a month off rent, though I didn't ask for it. I think he felt responsible too. After everything, the police told me the man's name was Lucas Grant. He had no prior record but apparently had been reported missing from another state 2 months before he showed up here. No one knows what happened in between. As for the woman, her name was Emily Rhodes. I found it in a local article weeks later. She had been reported missing by her sister in Spokane. The police never released details of what he did to her in that apartment, but whatever it was, it left her nearly unrecognizable for a while. I moved out at the end of the summer. I couldn't stay there anymore. Every time I looked up at that ceiling, all I could think of was her, stuck in that tiny closet, just feet above where I'd been sitting, drinking tea, watching TV, going about my normal day. The duplex looked normal from the outside, quaint even. But now, I can't drive past a house with a second floor lit up at night without wondering what might be happening inside. People like to think that if something really bad was happening nearby, they'd know. They'd feel it. But the truth is, horror doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers through the ceiling. I still have the recordings. I don't listen to them anymore, but I haven't deleted them either. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wants to remember that things like this do happen. That sometimes your instincts are the only thing standing between someone's life and death. I've had neighbors since then, and I've never hesitated to knock, check in, or call if something feels off. I don't care about being the nosy one anymore. If you hear something, say something. Even if it's nothing, even if people roll their eyes, do it anyway. Because I heard her. I heard her. And for days she was trapped right above me, begging for someone, anyone, to listen. I've never been the type to post on forums like this, but what happened last year still messes with my head, and I need to get it out somehow. My name's Eric, I'm 32, and I live in a small 1-bedroom apartment just outside St. Paul, Minnesota. Nothing fancy, Just one of those older brick buildings with thin walls and weird smells in the hallway that no one ever talks about. I'd been living there for about 9 months when all of this went down. Back then, I worked the night shift at a printing warehouse, so I was usually getting home around 2 or 3 in the morning, when the building was quiet and the halls felt hollow. My next-door neighbor, the girl in Unit 3B, kept to herself. I only saw her a handful of times, usually on Sundays when she'd take out the trash or collect a stack of Amazon boxes. Her name was Dana, late 20s, I think. Always wore oversized hoodies and had this tired look in her eyes, like she was constantly running on fumes. We never really talked beyond the occasional, "Hey," but I'd hear her through the wall sometimes, laughing at something on TV, talking on the phone, moving furniture around at weird hours. It never bothered me. It just felt like normal apartment noise. Until it didn't. It started with silence. I noticed I hadn't heard anything from her place for days. No TV, no footsteps, nothing. At first I figured she went on vacation or maybe just got sick of the place and moved out. But then, 4 or 5 nights in a row, I noticed her TV was on. Same low blue flicker against the blinds. Same static hum through the wall. But still, no movement, no voice, no footsteps. Just the damn TV and every now and then, a dull thump on the shared wall. Not loud. More like rhythmic taps, like someone bumping into something every few minutes. After about a week of this, I ran into the landlord while grabbing my mail and casually asked about Dana. He looked at me like I was mistaken and said, "Oh, she moved out last week." Just like that. I asked if he was sure, told him I still heard her TV on every night. He shrugged and said maybe she left it behind or someone else was subletting. But that didn't make sense. I would have seen someone moving in. No new faces, no furniture being dragged up the narrow stairs. And something about the way he brushed it off. It felt wrong, like he didn't want to deal with it. That night I paid extra attention. I turned off all the lights in my apartment, sat in the dark near the shared wall and just listened. The TV was on again, some kind of late-night game show, the sound barely audible. But around 1:30 a.m., I heard something else. A sharp thud, followed by what sounded like dragging. Then silence. A few minutes later, there was this soft, stuttering knock, like someone tapping weakly on drywall. It came 3 times. Pause. Then again. I swear my stomach dropped. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart pounding, and I could hear what sounded like shallow breathing, raspy, uneven. It only lasted a few seconds before it went quiet again. I didn't sleep that night. The next day I knocked on her door, 3B. No answer. I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. I even pressed my ear against her door, feeling like a total creep, but hoping for something. It was dead silent. I considered calling the landlord again, but I already knew he wasn't going to do anything. So I went back inside and tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe the TV was on a timer. Maybe the sounds were coming from the apartment above or below. But that night, it escalated. Around 2 a.m., I was brushing my teeth when I heard it through the bathroom vent. At first it sounded like static, just white noise from the other unit. But then it shifted. It was faint, but definitely human. Muffled. Like someone was trying to scream with something shoved in their mouth. It wasn't loud, but it had this desperate, choking edge to it that made my skin crawl. I froze, toothbrush in hand, and just listened. A second later, it stopped. Then, out of nowhere, a loud bang against the wall, so hard my mirror rattled. I dropped everything and backed out of the bathroom. That's when I decided to call the cops. I felt stupid explaining it. I think someone might be trapped next door. I hear weird noises through the wall in the vent. I expected them to laugh or brush it off, but to my surprise, They said they'd send someone to check it out. About 15 minutes later, I watched two officers walk into the building from my window. I stepped into the hallway when they reached her door, just in time to hear one of them knock and announce themselves. No answer. After a minute, they called the landlord to unlock the door. I stood there, heart in my throat, as they opened Unit 3B. I couldn't see much from the hallway, but the second they stepped inside, one of the officers immediately called for backup. The other went straight down the hallway past the living room toward the back of the apartment. I heard him shout. Then what sounded like a struggle, furniture scraping, something hitting the floor. I'll never forget the look on the first officer's face when he came back into the hallway. Pale, tight-jawed. He told me to go back to my apartment and wait. I tried to ask what was going on, but he wasn't having it. I shut the door but pressed my ear against it like a damn spy. More cops showed up a few minutes later, and then an ambulance. I watched them carry someone out on a stretcher, but I couldn't see who it was. Everything happened so fast. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I opened my door just as one of the officers was leaving and asked him, flat out, what the hell had happened. He paused, looked me over and said, "You probably saved her life, man." That's when he told me. Dana had never moved out. She'd been chained inside her own bedroom for over a week. Her ex-boyfriend had been living there pretending she was gone, texting people from her phone, using her name to keep up appearances. He'd been keeping her locked up in there, right next to me, while I went about my life. Eating cereal, watching movies, sleeping. All while she was on the other side of the wall, trapped and screaming into a vent, hoping someone would hear her. I still can't wrap my head around it. The cop said she was weak but alive, bruised, malnourished. But she was going to be okay. Her ex had apparently snapped after she broke up with him and had been squatting in the apartment ever since. The TV, the tapping, the muffled cries. She'd been trying to get out the only way she could. They let me give a statement, and I never heard anything else after that. I think Dana's family came and picked her up a few days later, but I never saw her again. The landlord changed the locks and cleaned out the place, but it still gives me chills walking past that door. I ended up moving out a couple of months later. Couldn't deal with the idea that something like that could happen literally feet away from me without anyone noticing. I think about it a lot. What if I hadn't called? What if I just kept ignoring it? I try not to spiral, but some nights, when everything's quiet, I still catch myself listening to the walls. I'm not really sure why I'm posting this here. I think I just need to get it off my chest. This happened about 6 months ago, and I still can't believe how close I came to something I don't even want to name. My name's Claire, I'm 32, and I live alone with my son Mason, who just turned 3. We moved into this quiet neighborhood in Oregon last year after my divorce. It's one of those places where everyone waves from their porch, lawns are always mowed, and the biggest drama is when someone forgets trash day. I thought we were safe here. Honestly, I felt safe. That's what makes this so hard to process. It all started when I went back to working part-time at a local marketing agency. I needed someone to watch Mason during a few afternoons a week, and hiring a full-time nanny wasn't really in my budget. That's when I met Abby. She was the teenage daughter of the couple next door, 16, maybe 17, super polite, soft-spoken, straight-A student according to her mom. I'd see her reading on the porch or walking someone's dog. When I first brought up the idea of babysitting, her mom was thrilled, said Abby was great with kids. And at first, she really was. Mason liked her. She played with him, cleaned up his toys, even left little notes saying what they did together. Everything seemed fine, normal. But about 3 weeks in, Mason started acting different. I didn't notice it all at once. It was small things at first. He stopped wanting to go into his room alone, which was weird because he used to love showing me his books and stuffed animals. Then he started waking up crying, soaked in sweat, calling for me in the middle of the night. When I asked him what was wrong, he'd just say, "The voice," or "the dark face." I assumed he was going through a nightmare phase. Kids do that, right? But then he started flinching, like physically jerking, if I walked into a room too fast or raised my voice even a little. That's when I started feeling like something wasn't right. One afternoon, he clung to my leg and whispered, "Don't leave me with her." I froze. It wasn't like Mason to say something like that. I tried to ask him what he meant, but he shut down completely, wouldn't talk, just buried his face in my sweater. That night I stayed up staring at the baby monitor like I was waiting for something to jump out. And then I remembered. I'd installed an old indoor camera in the living room a while back, connected to an app on my phone, mainly to check in when I was at work. I never used it much, but something told me I needed to go back and look at the footage. I waited until Mason was asleep and opened the app on my phone. The camera had a rolling cloud storage, so I could access footage from the past week. I didn't even know what I was looking for at first. Maybe her being on her phone too much, or letting Mason watch TV for hours. But what I saw made my stomach drop. It started off normal, Abby sitting on the couch while Mason played on the rug. But then I noticed she had her phone propped up, camera facing her, like she was on a video call. And she wasn't whispering or keeping it quiet. She was talking to someone, laughing. She didn't even glance at Mason when he called out for her. He tripped trying to get her attention at one point, and she didn't even look up. I kept watching. And then I saw it. Mason was being fussy. He wanted juice or something, I couldn't hear exactly. But Abby stood up, yanked him by the arm, and opened the hallway closet. I watched, completely frozen, as she shoved him inside, closed the door, and went right back to her video call. I swear I stopped breathing. He must have been in there for a good 10 minutes before she let him out. And when she did, she didn't even say a word to him. Just handed him a toy like nothing happened. My hands were shaking. I scrubbed through other clips. It wasn't just once. She'd done it 3 times that week. Every single time she was on that call. But it got worse. I turned the volume all the way up and listened closely. The person she was talking to, it was a man's voice. Older. I couldn't make out everything, but the parts I did catch made my skin crawl. He asked her questions, things like, "Is the window in the kid's room still unlocked?" Or, "Does she always leave through the front door?" At one point, Abby walked through the house with her camera facing outward, almost like she was giving a virtual tour. She opened cabinets, walked down the hall, even showed under the kitchen sink. I felt like I was going to throw up. I paused the video when she walked into my bedroom. My bedroom. She laughed and said something like, "She never locks this one either." I didn't sleep at all that night. I took Mason into bed with me and locked the door. I kept replaying that man's voice over and over in my head. The way he spoke. It wasn't just curiosity. It was cold, calculated, like he was memorizing details, planning. I wanted to storm next door and confront Abby right then, but something told me to be careful. If she was just a dumb teenager making bad decisions, that was one thing. But if she was working with someone who wanted to hurt us, I had no idea what we were actually dealing with. The next morning, I called in sick to work and kept Mason home with me. I didn't say a word to Abby or her parents. I wanted to. God, I wanted to scream at them, but I was scared. I didn't know how deep this went. So I called the police. I showed them the footage, explained everything as calmly as I could. The officer I spoke with didn't say much, but I could see the shift in his face when he heard the man's voice on the video. He left the room for a while, came back, and told me they were escalating it to a special unit. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a teenage girl being careless. This was something darker. Later that day, they interviewed Abby. I don't know what she told them, but her family suddenly went silent. No more porch reading, no more friendly waves. 2 days later, a black SUV showed up in front of their house and parked for hours. I watched from behind the curtain, holding Mason so tight he kept asking if I was okay. From what I was told afterward, Abby had been in contact with someone through a private messaging app for months. Someone much older, who'd been coaching her on how to build trust and desensitize Mason. They had a name for it: grooming by proxy. She was basically prepping him for someone else. That someone was the man on the video calls. Turns out this guy had done it before. He'd manipulated other teens into doing the same thing. Always quiet towns, always single parents. He hadn't made a move on us yet, but according to police, he was close. They found screenshots on Abby's phone, photos of my front door, my bedroom window, even the lock on our sliding glass door. I didn't even know she had been in the backyard. I felt sick for weeks. Abby was taken into custody, but because she was a minor, a lot of what happened next was kept quiet. All I know is that she never came back home. Her family moved a month later. House still sits empty. I've changed every lock in this place. Got a full security system installed, motion lights, cameras inside and out. I even bought a big-ass dog, some rescue mutt with a bark like thunder. Mason's doing better now. He still doesn't sleep with the light off. And he won't talk about Abby, but he laughs again. That's something. As for me, I can't trust anyone anymore. I don't let anyone watch him, not even family. I don't know if I ever will. That kind of violation, it changes you. Makes you see threats where there used to be neighbors. Makes you check the closet twice before going to bed. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't checked that camera that night. How far they would have gone. And it terrifies me how easy it was for someone to get so close, right under my nose, with a smile and good manners. If you're reading this and you've got kids, please, check the cameras. Trust your gut. No matter how sweet someone seems, no matter how well you think you know them, you don't. Not really. I had just signed the lease on a small rental unit in a quiet part of town called Pine Hollow. One of those sleepy neighborhoods where everyone waves, lawns are always trimmed, and mailboxes still have flags. It was late September, and the divorce papers were barely a week old when I moved in. I was still figuring out how to live by myself again. Cooking for one, silences stretching longer, the TV humming just to fill the space. The unit was modest but clean, with creaky floors and a slightly musty smell I figured came from the age of the place. I wasn't looking for excitement, just somewhere to breathe, start fresh, maybe figure out who the hell I was again at 38. The day I moved in, I met Walter, my neighbor to the left. He had that old-school American grandpa vibe. Suspenders, thick gray hair combed neatly to the side, oversized glasses, and a voice like he'd smoked for 50 years, but gave it up last week. He shuffled over while I was carrying a box labeled kitchen stuff, offered me a cold can of root beer, and smiled wide enough for me to notice his bottom teeth were missing. "Always nice to have a new face on the block," he said. Harmless, I thought. Over-friendly, maybe. But in a place like Pine Hollow, it just felt like part of the package. Friendly neighbors, nosy maybe, but well-meaning. Walter started stopping by a lot. At first it was just small talk over the fence or a quick hello when I was getting the mail. Then he started knocking on my door with extra stew or leftover ribs. I'll admit, the guy could cook. His brisket was the real deal. I always thanked him and sent him off with a smile, but I started noticing this eagerness in his eyes, like he was always waiting for a longer conversation. A real one. A few times he asked if I wanted to come over for a drink, but I always had an excuse. Work, tired, busy. He didn't seem offended, just persistent. About 2 weeks after I moved in, he asked if I'd come check something out in his basement. "Got this old Civil War saber I think you'd get a kick out of," he said, grinning that same big gummy smile. I laughed it off, told him I wasn't much of a history guy, and kept it moving. But he brought it up again the next time. And the next. Each time it was something different. Old tools, vintage beer signs, a weird little jukebox from the 60s. I didn't think much of it until I realized how often he mentioned that basement. It was like every excuse he had to talk to me eventually led back to that one place. One night, maybe 3 weeks in, I was out back on my small patio smoking a cigarette. Something I'd picked back up after the divorce, unfortunately, when Walter leaned over the fence. He startled me, just standing there quietly in the dark, only lit by the dim motion light above my door. "You ever wonder what people leave behind?" he asked, completely out of nowhere. I gave a half laugh, mostly confused. He nodded toward his own house. "I've lived here over 30 years. You find the strangest things when you stay in one place long enough. You really should see the stuff I got down there." His voice was casual, but something about the way he said "down there" made the hairs rise on the back of my neck. I told him maybe another time and went inside, locking the door behind me. Something I hadn't done until that night. After that, things got weirder. I started noticing Walter sitting on his front steps in the early evening, just watching. He'd wave, but never left his porch, like he was waiting for me to come over on my own. I caught him once in the early morning too, around 5:30 a.m., standing in his yard staring at my living room window. I didn't have the lights on. He couldn't have known I was up. But when I peeked through the curtain, his eyes met mine immediately. He smiled, then turned around and went back inside. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Then came the night I finally gave in. I was coming home from the grocery store, juggling too many bags and cursing myself for forgetting eggs, when I saw him waiting by his mailbox. He helped me carry one of the bags up to my door, made some small joke about earning his good neighbor badge, and then, of course, invited me over for a drink. I don't know if it was the stress or the exhaustion or just plain curiosity, but I agreed. "Just one drink," I told him. I even remember glancing at my phone and thinking, "I'll be back in 20 minutes." His house had that dusty old people smell, mixed with lemon cleaner and something faintly metallic I couldn't place. We sat in his kitchen while he poured us both glasses of bourbon. I noticed there were no photos on the walls, no family pictures on the fridge, just old calendars and a weird painting of a field full of crows. After some awkward small talk, he stood up suddenly and said, "You know what? You should finally see that saber I told you about." Before I could say anything, he was already walking toward the basement door at the far end of the hall, waving for me to follow. I followed slowly, the hallway narrowing as we reached the basement door. It was heavier than I expected. Thick wood with old brass hinges and a deadbolt on the outside. I made a quiet note of that, but before I could say anything, he was already unlocking it. As he pushed the door open, I caught a glimpse of something odd. On the inside of the door, there were 2 more locks, bolt style, with scratches around them like they'd been used a lot. That weird metallic smell hit stronger here, and I noticed his hand trembled slightly as he flicked on the light. "Watch your step," he said casually, descending slowly. The basement was cold and surprisingly well lit. Fluorescent tubes buzzed above us, revealing a large workbench lined with all kinds of tools, but not the kind you'd use for fixing pipes or building birdhouses. I saw leather straps, what looked like shackles, and a weird steel contraption that reminded me of a head brace. My throat went dry. There was a tarp draped over something in the corner. I couldn't stop staring at it. That's when I noticed the walls. They were padded. Not like for insulation. They looked soundproofed, layered with thick black foam and wooden reinforcement. Walter was saying something about antiques, but I couldn't hear a word over the rush of blood in my ears. He moved toward the workbench, turning his back for just a second. And that's when I saw him glance at the door, my only exit. I realized he was checking the distance, gauging how fast I could move. Without thinking, I stepped backward, slow at first, then all at once. As he turned, I bolted up the stairs 2 at a time. He shouted something, my name, I think, and I heard the slam of his shoes on the first few steps behind me. I didn't stop. I crashed through the basement door, didn't even look back, just ran out of his house, across the lawn, and into mine. I locked every door, shoved a chair under the knob, and called 911 with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The cops showed up 10 minutes later. I met them outside, still barefoot, still holding the phone. I told them everything, down to the locks, the restraints, the soundproofing. They took it seriously. I think they could see it in my face. I wasn't making this up. I watched from my window as they knocked on his door, then entered. He didn't resist. He just stood there, calm, quiet, like he'd been waiting for it. They were in there a long time. When one of the officers finally came back to talk to me, his face was pale. "You did the right thing getting out," he said. That's all he told me. Later I learned through a local news article that Walter's basement had human remains. Partial ones. They found photos hidden in the wall, items belonging to at least 3 people who had gone missing in the last 15 years. One of them was a guy named Darren, a traveling electrician who had rented the same unit I was living in. 6 years before me, no one had ever found a trace of him. Until now. I moved out the following week. Couldn't sleep in that house another night, knowing how close I came to becoming one of those news clips. People always ask how I didn't see it sooner. The weird behavior, the red flags. But the truth is, people like Walter don't wear masks. They smile. They cook for you. They wait. And when they think the time is right, they invite you down to the basement. I was 26 when it happened. I'd just moved into my own place for the first time, tiny second-floor apartment on the edge of town, kind of old but cozy. It was just me and my cat, Pepper. I worked long shifts at a small marketing firm about 30 minutes away, so I'd usually get home around 6:30 p.m. My building was the kind of place where neighbors didn't really talk, but they smiled in passing. It felt safe. I remember thinking how nice it was to finally have my own space after years of sharing with roommates. Quiet, clean, mine. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. I'd come home, make dinner, maybe read a bit or watch something before bed. Nothing out of the ordinary, until I started noticing something weird with my curtains. At first, I just thought I was being forgetful. I'd come home and the curtain in my bedroom would be slightly open, just enough to let in a sliver of light. I always closed it before leaving for work because Pepper loved to sit on the windowsill and watch birds, and she'd knock stuff over if she jumped up there. I figured maybe I hadn't pulled it all the way closed, or she managed to squeeze her way behind it. But it started happening more often. Always the same, just enough of a gap to make me feel like something was off. I even joked to a coworker that my apartment was haunted. We laughed it off, but deep down, it bothered me more than I let on. One Thursday evening, I got home and noticed something that made my stomach twist. Right on the inside of the bedroom window, just on the edge of the sill, there was a muddy smudge. At first, I thought Pepper might have stepped in something, but it was too big for her paw. I leaned in closer. It was a footprint. A partial one, but human, like the edge of a boot or shoe had pressed down there, just enough to leave dirt behind. I stood frozen, staring at it. The window was locked. I checked it 3 times. I didn't want to panic, so I told myself maybe someone had been doing maintenance outside and stepped on the ledge somehow, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking I heard creaks in the hallway or faint taps near the window. The next day after work, I went straight to Best Buy and bought one of those tiny indoor cameras. Nothing fancy, just something I could stick on the dresser facing my bedroom window. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even want to talk about it out loud, like naming it would make it more real. I set it up, connected it to an app on my phone, and angled it just right. That night I went through my normal routine, locked every window and door twice, and tried to sleep. Every little sound made me jolt awake, heart pounding. But nothing happened. The next day, I checked the footage. Nothing. Day after that, nothing. I started to feel silly. Maybe I really had just been imagining things. But on the fourth day, everything changed. It was a Sunday and I'd gone out for brunch with a friend. I came back around 2 p.m. and my phone buzzed with a motion notification from the camera app. I opened it without thinking much, expecting maybe Pepper jumping onto the dresser. But the clip that loaded made my entire body go cold. A man was in my room. I froze. He'd come in through the bedroom window, moving slowly, carefully, like he'd done it 100 times. He was tall, wearing dark jeans, a zip-up hoodie, and gloves. I couldn't see his face. He kept it low, turned away from the camera. But what shook me the most was how calm he looked. No rush, no panic. He just stood near the foot of my bed and watched. I kept watching, heart racing. He walked around the room looking at my things, not touching much. He stood over my bed for a long time. I don't know how long. I couldn't watch the timestamp. Just seeing him there, where I slept, breathing the same air, was enough to make me feel like I couldn't breathe. Then, just as quietly as he came, he left through the window again, pulling it almost shut behind him. I replayed the video maybe 10 times, each time noticing something new. The way he tilted his head when he looked at the bed. The way he moved straight to the dresser where the camera was, like he was aware but didn't care. He knew where everything was. This wasn't his first visit. I called the police right away. I was shaking so hard I dropped my phone twice. 2 officers came out and I showed them the footage. They took it seriously, thank God, and asked if I had any idea who the guy could be. I said no. I barely knew any of my neighbors. They dusted the window area for prints and promised to send someone to patrol the area over the next few days. Still, I couldn't stay there. That night I crashed at my friend Alyssa's place across town. I didn't bring much, just some clothes and Pepper. I couldn't be in that apartment, not knowing someone had been watching me, not knowing if he'd planned to come back. The next morning, the detective working my case called. They'd reviewed more of the footage and pulled a still image of the guy's face when he glanced toward the dresser. It was blurry, but enough to get a decent idea. They canvassed the neighborhood, showing the image to people nearby. And that's when one of my neighbors, a woman from across the street named Carol, recognized him. She said his name was Craig, lived just 2 houses down from her, kept to himself. She always thought he was a little strange, but never had a reason to be concerned. The police got a warrant and went to his house that afternoon. What they found in his garage made my skin crawl. Dozens, literally dozens of printed photos of me, pinned up on the walls. Some were taken from a distance, like through my window at night. Others were close, inside my apartment. Shots of me sleeping, brushing my hair, folding laundry. Stuff I never imagined anyone else would ever see, let alone photograph. There were even pictures of me wearing things I no longer owned, clothes I had thrown out months ago. The detective told me Craig had probably been sneaking in for a while. Maybe weeks. Maybe months. They think he'd been entering during the day when I was at work and leaving before I got back. Always careful, always quiet, always watching. What gets me the most is how normal he looked. Craig was 41, worked from home, no criminal record. Lived in that house for years. The neighbors described him as quiet, polite, a little odd but harmless. I even remembered seeing him once or twice when I was getting into my car. I never felt anything off. That's the part that messes with your head. How someone can be so invisible, so unremarkable on the surface, and still be capable of something so invasive and disturbing. He never spoke to me, never left a note, never stole anything. He just wanted to watch. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later, broke the lease, paid the penalty, didn't care. I couldn't sleep there anymore. Even after Craig was arrested and taken into custody, I kept imagining him still in the room watching. The sound of my own breath at night would freak me out. Every time I heard a creak or the wind rattled the window, I'd jolt awake. I still check windows and curtains obsessively, even in my new place. The idea that someone had been inside my space, my safe little world, without me knowing, just existing quietly in the background, changed the way I see everything. I triple-check locks. I don't live on the ground floor. I don't trust quiet neighbors. Craig was charged with multiple counts of breaking and entering, trespassing, and stalking. He's still awaiting trial, last I heard. I haven't gone to any hearings. Don't think I can stomach seeing his face again. The police said I was lucky. Lucky that he never escalated. Lucky that I caught it when I did. But it doesn't feel like luck. It feels like I was prey and just happened to notice the trap in time. Sometimes I wonder how long it would have gone on if I hadn't set up that camera. How many other people have someone like that watching them and don't even know it?